Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film The High and the Mighty from 1954. And this is continuing my quest to review as much of William Wellman's filmography as I possibly can. This film, produced by Wayne Fellows, which would eventually become Bat Jack, and is also starring John Wayne, is one of the original disaster films, where you have an all-star cast leading to a disastrous element or a potentially disastrous element. In this film, it's a plane going from Honolulu to San Francisco, and during the flight, one of the engines gives out and it looks like they might have to land in the ocean, and they have to get the passengers ready, and the crew, including John Wayne and Robert Stack, have to try to navigate the plane to safety, even with all these things going wrong. This was one of the original disaster films, and I think when you think of disaster films, they don't seem that adventurous, they don't seem that auteur-driven, and I think this is really a film by Wellman. I look at him both as a Hollywood director, but more as an auteur director, and it felt like at this time he was itching to be more of an auteur director. So this film almost doesn't feel like him in the 50s, the way West for the Women and Track of the Cat, and those are very different kind of big budget films. And The High and the Mighty, which was a huge hit and let him make tons and tons of more movies. It played in Times Square apparently for 2 years, and at that time lots of people saw movies in Times Square, although they still do see a lot of movies in Times Square. I can almost understand why Wellman isn't brought up by more people who came out of the 60s and 70s, because they probably had seen The High and the Mighty and knew it as William Wellman's, because it said on there, William A. Wellman's The High and the Mighty. And I think when you look at a film like the disaster films that were later parodied in Airplane, and this film actually started that whole genre. They compare the script of this to The Grand Hotel and Stagecoach, and it was certainly, the idea of it was around before, but doing this in a plane, the genre that later films like Airport and 0 Hour, and they were films that eventually the Zucker brothers would parody with Airplane. This film introduced that. And to introduce kind of a genre, you have to have a huge hit, so the studios are like, oh hey, this made a lot of money, people like this, so we will make more of it. When you look at The High and the Mighty, it's an excellently crafted, very studio film. I think audiences and most people actually like well-crafted studio films. They like to see a big Hollywood movie, and The High and the Mighty is a great example of that, in showing how well Hollywood can do story. And the exposition in this film, I think when you're going to do a film that takes place on an airplane, which Jack Warner thought this was a disastrous idea and people would get bored because it's hard to hold people's attention in an airplane for 100 minutes. According to him, even though this is like 146 or something, it's fairly long. But the reason you can do that, and I've seen other films do it as well, is you have to introduce a lot of the passengers. Not every passenger. In this film, there aren't a ton of passengers. It's not a completely full flight, so it kind of works in that regard. In the beginning of the film, you have all the passengers coming to the ticket counter and talking to the ticket taker, and it's very kind of obvious, but it's very smart at the same time, because now I know, oh, this is the couple who's going on a trip. Oh, this is the young couple whose honeymoon it is. Oh, this is the Korean woman who doesn't know English that well, the guy who hastily got on the plane. You know these little things about these people. And Wellman did that also in Story of G.I. Joe and Battleground, where he has a large group of people, but he knows how to introduce them. They all have a little thing. Whether it's in this film, you have a guy with a watch that makes little chimes at 7 o'clock. Things like that. It's kind of like the guy at work who shows you a meme every day. It gives you something to identify with. When you have a large group of people like this in a film, it helps you as an audience get into it, so that when the bad stuff happens on this film and when things are happening to the airplane, you care about all these people. Showing people crying in kind of a montage will slightly work, but really knowing characters will mean more to you. Seeing someone randomly die isn't going to mean as much as if they were a friend. And I think that's the same idea when you're telling a story like this. And that's why The High and the Mighty, I think, lived on so well, because there's a real connection. You know, it has all this runtime and it really goes into all these characters. The woman who's meeting this guy she's agreed to marry over the post, and she used to be a glamour girl, and she sent him an old photo and she's worried that he'll find her disgusting, which kind of reminds me of Purchase Price in a way. I wonder if he was trying to harken back to that, but not really. I don't know, probably reading into that. Or that he has one of his sons play this kid who slept through the whole thing. It's very smart, and it's written by Ernest K. Gantt, who also wrote Island in the Sky. And Wellman is really good at working with authors. Wellman obviously wanted to work on this film because he was a flyer. He liked aviation films. He made several aviation films. It was in CinemaScope. The print I saw on it, and I had it on a 16:9 TV, looked gorgeous. This was shot by William Cothier, who helped shoot Wings and worked with William Wellman a lot, and John Wayne, in fact. And I think he really knew how to shoot an aviation film. This film is just a gorgeous, gorgeous movie, the way they shot it. And I think it really used CinemaScope, but it didn't use CinemaScope. When I bring up Wings, is the way that was shot is very adventurous and experimental. And you're not getting this from The High and the Mighty. You're getting William Wellman, the Hollywood director, but it kind of showed he could really do a very Hollywood movie and a perfect Hollywood movie. This shows him as the studio director, and excellently as a studio director. When I say studio director, now it's more of an insult because there's not very many good studio directors now. At the time in old Hollywood, most of the good directors could pull out a very great studio picture. Wellman, he was coming towards the end of his MGM run. I think he really gave it his all in The High and the Mighty, and kind of showed being a studio director the glorious thing in it and how he got it to sing and work. When John Wayne flashes back to the plane crash that killed his wife and son, that worked almost like silent Wellman did, especially the shot of the teddy bear on fire. Even the shot of the navigator's wife in the chip and dip seemed a little experimental, not too much. Wellman, from Story of G.I. Joe and Battleground, knew how to get a group, or even Oxbow Incident actually, knew how to get a group of actors to work and not just be normal faces in the crowd. And he was almost perfect to introduce this genre. He had a great group of actors with John Wayne and Claire Trevor and Lorraine Day and Robert Stack and John Sterling and Phil Harris, Paul Fix, William Campbell, Wally Brown, John Howard. So many great actors in this film, and I think Wellman knew how to cast it very well. He wanted to cast actually Barbara Stanwyck and Ida Lupino and Ginger Rogers, and they all turned it down because there's no real star of this. You know, it's weird that John Wayne gets top billing just because he's John Wayne, because he's not even really the star. I almost feel like Robert Stack is kind of the leading man, but not really. It's more of an ensemble piece, and they didn't really want to do that at the time, but this film ended up getting a lot of Oscar nominations, getting 6 Oscar nominations, 2 for Best Supporting Actress, 1 from Jan Sterling, another for Claire Trevor. It's unfortunate. I would have liked to see Stanwyck in a film like this from William Wellman. I think it would have really worked for her. I also like John Wayne a lot. Apparently it was originally a Spencer Tracy part. Spencer Tracy, some say it's because he heard William Wellman was like hard to deal with on set, which I find odd since he had worked with William Wellman in Looking for Trouble, but he had worked with William Wellman before, and for him to have heard that seems a little bizarre since he had worked with him about 20 years before. Really what happened, and makes more sense, is Spencer Tracy was very liberal and he wasn't really fond of John Wayne's conservative views and conservative politics, and it was around the time of the Blacklist, and he didn't want to be involved in a film produced by John Wayne, so he didn't do it. I think that's probably the real reason. This really shows a lot of range from John Wayne. Both this and Island in the Sky shows a different John Wayne, a very kind of almost like William Wellman's John Wayne. And William Wellman's John Wayne is a lot more sensitive. He's a lot less like the star of the picture. He's really working with an ensemble, and he's still certainly playing the star role in both. But in this especially, it does feel more like John Wayne's version of a Spencer Tracy role, and he doesn't feel as assured as Spencer Tracy does. He feels like this plane could really go down, and these people could die. And he has a dark past to him that he really sells in kind of a earnest, kind of subtle way that I don't think a lot of actors could. This film was unavailable for 20 years. The last time it had played on TV was 1985, and then it didn't get released on DVD until 2005, and then it started to play on TV again. So I think it kind of hurt John Wayne's legacy, this film being completely unavailable for 20 years. Had this film been around, people could see like how good of an actor John Wayne really was. Unfortunately, they didn't. People were just used to the cowboy. But I think it shows a better range from him. More so in this than I think Island in the Sky. I think he shows more of a quiet guy. John Wayne could play subtlety a lot better than people really give him credit for. And I think especially in these non-cowboy films that he really could pull off with William Wellman. He worked really well. I kind of almost wish him and Wellman had made a Western together, but I mean, they did, but John Wayne wasn't in it. Robert Stack in this film is interesting. I love Robert Stack, and I've had a lifelong obsession with Robert Stack, mostly because of Unsolved Mysteries, but also because of Airplane and his various comedic roles. And I think when thinking about this film, and it introduced a genre that Airplane would later parody, Airplane apparently literally parodies his role in this film. And I like that Robert Stack literally helped invent a genre and then helped make fun of it later. And it kind of had my mind blown when I was reading, like, oh, you know, this film introduced the genre that would eventually become Airplane. And then I was like, wait, this film introduced it. So Robert Stack was there at the beginning and at the end almost. That he's that directly parodying himself, and that he had that kind of a sense of humor. He does a good job playing off Wayne, playing the nervous guy. I think everyone in this film kind of has to know how to play their certain role and get you into the character quickly so you know the critical information. The ensemble in this, it's so tightly structured and so much about the storytelling and caring about all this stuff that you can't do all that more fun, like experimental stuff that especially Wellman's known for and better directors are known for. And it's harder to do this kind of thing while still making a great movie. But I think The High and the Mighty definitely does it, and especially with the amazing score from Dimitri Tompkin, who he's the one who won an Oscar for this film, actually. It punctuates things that I don't think would be as awe-inspiring without it, and I often complain about scores that really punctuate big moments, that it almost feels like the score like needs to tell you that. But it felt like in this film it emphasized it in such a glorious, glamorous way that really hit you at home so you remember it, where you had that scientist who came back to talk to the other scientists who were I guess basically experimenting with nuclear missile stuff. When he walks in with that score, it just makes it even more dramatic. It feels like it's really more of a storyteller in the film. It's really trying to show you like this is important, pay attention. It kind of emphasizes the moments, and it does so in such an amazing way. I actually do like a nicely made Hollywood film. There's always been a disinterest in that because it's not adventurous. It feels kind of boring and a cog in the machine almost, you know, very studio made, very tested and everything. I don't think Wellman was that kind of director most of the time, but he knew how to do that kind of stuff, and this was why he was one of the better Hollywood directors of the studio era, because he could do that if he wanted to. And even though at this time I don't think he was really interested in doing that anymore, he still pulled it out of the park and felt it was a great movie. And I actually think it was. In the end, a good entertaining movie is a good entertaining movie. And sure, it doesn't show Wellman as much as a lot more of his experimental stuff showcase him as a director. But when I look at films like Track of the Cat and West for the Women and a lot of his more experimental stuff, I actually think this is probably his best later film that I've seen. You know, I was really connected to all the characters. It really felt like I went through something. There's something about being an audience member and feeling, not that you really did, but feeling that you went through like a big thing with these people on this disaster film. And I felt that way a lot during The High and the Mighty. I felt like I really connected to the characters as well. Why this film had such a connection to an audience. You know, maybe it's not as sexy as other films, and this film came out the same year as On the Waterfront, which won all the Oscars that it was nominated for, including Wellman as Best Director. It was his third nomination as Best Director. It definitely was an example more of a studio picture than the adventurous films would later happen in the 60s and the 70s. But there's nothing wrong with that, and I think Wellman could still show what was so great about a studio film, and I think he made one of the stronger ones. The High and the Mighty, it's unfortunate that it kind of gotten forgotten, but it does show like some good acting, and it wasn't just a fluke that it was nominated for an Oscar, or 6 Oscars really. It was just a finely made Hollywood film. And Wellman knew how to be a studio director enough to make a very finely made Hollywood film, and even shoot in CinemaScope, which was new at the time, so in a way it's kind of experimental. And I think it showcases Wellman as a director, even though you don't see as much auteur touches as you usually do from William Wellman. I definitely really enjoyed watching a very well-made kind of old studio Hollywood film, the way High and the Mighty was. So if you have seen The High and the Mighty and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. As you know, I'm not doing these Wellman reviews as frequently as I did last year, but I am going to do one a month from now on. However, this month, since we're kicking things off with the William Wellman series, the monthly William Wellman series, I thought I'd do 2 this month. And in about 2 weeks, This Man's Navy starring Wallace Beery. And I hope to see you then, and thank you for watching.